things that just look very similar, like super similar, like everything's the same except for one parameter, it's definitely time to refactor. So let's do that now. So I know I just said we weren't, but it's just that hard to look at. Canadian 1010 says, ever consider adding a .NET framework to this game? I don't quite know what that means, Canadian. If you can elaborate, we can certainly explore. Okay. Oops, I guess I already had that. Alright, so what I want to do here instead is here, private dot bool. I can say is in play and take in an iGame object, and I can return I might get us closer, but we'd still have this game response here. And typically I'm really against just checking for nulls. But it would be really convenient here to check for a null. Okay. Let's try this. We're going to see how it looks if we use a Boolean check and a method to clean this up a bit. So it might end up being a little busy, but busy is the first step to being right. Like, I mean, you know, it's busy and cleaner, and then we can come back and we can work on our algorithms and our approach to make it a little neater. So we're going to also need to get the request in there, and then we need to get the game object.name. This already feels a bit better. Return. Then we're going to take the game object. That game object state is equal to game object states in play. So as comparison, we're going to say, if this is true, return true. If it's false, return false, right? And okay, so that's going to allow us to do if is in play. Sorry, if it's not in play, the sender, we go ahead and return out of play response, request, and then sender. If not is in play, the target, and return the out of play response for the request and the target. Alright, and so what this allows us to do is at least to clean up our execute statement, which should be pretty straightforward. We don't generally want to see a lot of this algorithmic code inside of our method. We want to, and it just breaks the single responsibility principle, and which is always a good gut check. Okay, so we're answering business questions. We're making sure we're following the single responsibility principle, and so hopefully this all flows a little more cleanly. When we come in here, we want to see what it's doing, right? We don't want to see what ancillary operations have to be performed to answer our business questions. We just want to see our business questions. Okay, it says like C#.net, text boxes may be a few images. I click this text box to attack the enemy. So this is C#, and we aren't using the .NET framework. We aren't using WinForms, which I think is what Canadian's getting to. So right now our only UI is the command line. But because we're doing all of our game engine logic in our core, I, or anybody else who wants to, can grab this project and then build out a presentation tier or GUI using the rules that we're working on. And I may as well. I might make like a web client. But we've got a whole lot of game stuff to do before we run on the fun stuff to talk about. Alright, so if the sender is not in play, then return the out of play response. And just to make this a little more intuitive to read, and since we're only writing this right now for this one case, let's just say bool dot is out of play. You're going to find this a lot as far as how do you want to name your flags. I like it when this side looks like this side, right? If the sender is out of play, then return the out of play response. I think that reads a little bit nicer. Okay. And this sets us up because I also want to do if the sender's stamina is less than or equal to 0. Actually, this is where it gets tough, because let's say that you had 1 stamina left and you wanted to do something that costs 2 stamina. Should we stop you here? I'm just going to throw that out there. It's actually a pretty good question based on what we've done so far. But for this, let's see if I even have access to like the sender. Right? So I don't actually even have access to stamina here. So let's go ahead and see just for a second why that is. We've got enough design patterns now where we are kind of constrained by our own world. We've made these rules, we've made this inheritance, and these patterns interlock in such a way that if we did our job properly, the best place to do something should also be the only place you can do it, right? There should be enough signs pointing towards that right answer. So we didn't expose stamina to all iGame objects, which should immediately be our first clue that maybe we're not doing this check in the right place. So let's go here. Our player inherits from our base actor and also uses the contract for iPlayer. Let's go into iPlayer. There's no stamina here. Go to base actor. Alright, so here we are. Stamina is only exposed inside of the base actor. So any stamina checks will need to be done here. And presumably this is the first time stamina has been introduced into the game, so there'd be no reason to add it to our base game objects, which makes our hive mind, where we only have access to the game object, the wrong place to do it. This keeps us pure, because the hive mind is also taking advantage of the flyweight pattern, which suggests that we can get the maximum amount of performance by dealing with the lightest weight object possible. So in our case, the lightest thing we can deal with is our very base class, the game object. So we don't want to pollute that. So here we are in stamina. So instead of our base actor, what else do we have? We can check the state. This already feels like a great place to do our check. So let's do this. We'll do a private. Hey there, Ashkatite. We're going to do a private void. And we're going to say check stamina. Private void check alive or dead. So we want our check state, which is something that we're inheriting from our command pattern, to call two different methods right now, whether it's alive or dead, or if this dot stamina is equal to 0. I'm going to do less than equal just to kind of check, grab any things that might fall through another check we need to make. So the game object state we won't change, but this dot actor state should be equal to actor states. We don't quite have a state for out of stamina, so let's go to that. Let's just say exhausted. And then we're going to just say get that description. So we're using this action states. This is a kind of an enum pattern where it allows us to throw in some properties and such and use classes as kind of this strongly typed identifier. So you might find a better name for it, but typically when you come across this approach, people call that enum pattern, and with that comes usually a two-string override, which I don't know if we've employed here, but the idea being if you typed alive to string, you might get back the description instead. Okay, so we are mucking around instead of our base actor. So we want to say actor states exhausted, and then we want to check stamina before we check alive or dead, so that way our alive or dead will override our stamina check. Okay. Canadian 1010 says a nice idea might be to create a bunch of events, like one that attacks an enemy, then have your character subscribe to that event. So the pub sub pattern is actually pretty useful in or just any kind of event-based programming, right? It seems pretty essential to a game. So we can see that here. We haven't employed it yet, but Canadian is absolutely right. If we're in a room, let's go and see if we didn't introduce any bugs. All right. So if we're in a room with Gary and Beth, then we definitely want to have everyone in this room to subscribe to events which occur inside of this room. So when Beth attacks Carl, we want it to output on Gary